Hello, dear readers. Welcome to another literary journey through time. Today I'm going to share with you a story that transports us to Mexico in 1883, where golden fields stretch beneath infinite skies and where love grows silently like flowers that bloom after long winters. It's a narrative about Rosa Mercedes, a woman who arrives at an abandoned hacienda carrying only her dignity and her dreams, and Francisco Esteban, a widowed man who lost the ability to see beauty in the world. Between them, something deeper than passion will be born. The delicate architecture of belonging will emerge. But tell me, where are you watching us from? Leave your city and country in the comments. I love getting to know our readers around the world. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your like so more people can discover these stories that touch the soul. Year 1883. Location: Hacienda San Francisco de los Olivos, northern Mexico. The sun was dying over the arid lands when the wagons swayed for the last time before stopping in front of the main house of Hacienda San Francisco de los Olivos. Rosa Mercedes Herrera stepped down from the vehicle with the same delicacy with which one touches a wound still tender, her feet finding the dusty ground like someone arriving in unknown territory where even the air seems to carry secrets. The property stretched before her like a sleeping body, with its adobe walls faded by time and its windows closed like eyes that had long lost the will to see the world. In the silence that weighed over everything, only the wind whispered among the dry leaves of the poplars, creating a melancholic melody that seemed to tell stories of better days. Francisco Esteban Montemayor emerged from the shadow of the porch with measured steps, each movement carrying the weight of one who had learned to walk alone through the corridors of his own life. At 35, he still maintained the proud posture of men of his lineage, but there was something in his dark eyes that spoke of internal storms, long uncalmed. "Are you the cook?" he asked, his deep voice cutting through the air like a dulled blade. There was no contempt in his words, only the practicality of a man who had learned to reduce people to their functions, thus protecting himself from the painful complexity of human bonds. Rosa inclined her head in a silent bow, her almond-shaped eyes capturing every detail of that face marked by mourning. She carried only a worn leather suitcase and a cloth bag where she kept her few belongings, but there was a dignity in her posture that not even poverty could steal. "Yes, sir. Rosa Mercedes Herrera, at your service." The words left her lips like petals falling from a flower, soft, but carrying a silent strength that Francisco didn't know how to interpret immediately. He guided her through the corridors of the house, their footsteps echoing against the stones like beats of a lonely heart. The room assigned to her was at the back of the property, near the stable, a small but clean space where light filtered through the single window created golden patterns on the whitewashed walls. Francisco stopped at the threshold, hands crossed behind his back, observing how she placed her luggage with the care of one who places treasures in a safe place. "The kitchen is always open. Prepare meals as you see fit. I eat little and in silence." There was such deep sadness in these words that Rosa felt something move in her chest, as if a long-locked door had opened just enough to let through a thread of light. She nodded, understanding that she was before a man who had built walls around his soul. That first night, while preparing a simple supper of warm tortillas and beans seasoned with fresh cilantro, Rosa could hear Francisco's footsteps through the corridors of the main house. They were the steps of one who walks without destination, like a caged animal that always travels the same path, hoping to find an exit that perhaps doesn't exist. When she served the meal, he ate without lifting his eyes from the plate, each forkful taken with the same concentration of one who fulfills an obligatory task. Rosa cleared the plates in silence, but before retiring, she left on the table a small yellow flower she had found growing among the courtyard stones. Francisco raised his eyes to the simple gift, and for an instant, something that seemed like surprise crossed his face. But when Rosa returned the next morning, the flower had disappeared, and he never mentioned the gesture. However, there was something different in the air that morning, as if the house itself had breathed a little more deeply. Chapter 2. The Awakening of Silent Hearts. The following days unrolled like pages of a book written in silences. Rosa would wake before even the first rays of sun touched the distant mountains, her bare feet sliding silently across the cold stones of the corridor. The kitchen received her like a familiar embrace, with its clay pots and wood stove that soon crackled with renewed life. There was a particular music in the way she worked, the gentle rhythm of dough being kneaded, the crystalline sound of running water, the whisper of spices being ground in the stone molcajete. Each gesture carried an unconscious grace, as if cooking were a form of silent prayer offered to the new day. Francisco sometimes watched her, hidden behind the linen curtains of his window. There was something hypnotic in the way she moved, a harmony that contrasted with the chaos that had long governed his existence. He saw how her delicate hands transformed simple ingredients into meals that awakened flavors long forgotten in his numbed palate. But it was on the third day that something changed irreversibly between them. Rosa had decided to clean the small abandoned garden behind the kitchen, where weeds grew among the forgotten flower beds, like tears crystallized by time. She was working kneeling under the afternoon sun, carefully pulling the invasive plants, when the knife she used to cut the more resistant roots slipped in her hands wet with earth. The cut was deep, and blood began to flow between her fingers like red petals blooming. Rosa stifled a moan, pressing the wound with her apron, but the fabric soon became soaked with red. Francisco appeared as if he had been called by some invisible force, his quick steps cutting the distance between them. Without saying a word, he took her hands in his, examining the wound with a delicacy that contrasted with the hardness of his features. "Come," he said simply, guiding her into the house. In the silence of his study, Francisco washed the wound with clean water and bandaged it with strips of white linen, his fingers working with the precision of one who had cared for wounds before. Rosa watched his concentrated face, noticing how his eyebrows furrowed slightly, and how he bit his lower lip when he concentrated. "Thank you," she murmured when he finished, but Francisco only nodded, avoiding meeting her eyes. That night, when Rosa returned to her room, she found on the wooden dresser a pair of new brown leather shoes, soft as gloves and the exact size of her feet. There was no note, no explanation, but she understood. It was Francisco's silent way of saying he cared, of demonstrating that he had noticed her worn shoes and the way she tried to hide the toes that sometimes appeared through the openings in the old leather. Rosa held the shoes against her chest, feeling the soft leather against her skin, and for the first time since arriving at the hacienda, she allowed some tears to roll down her cheeks. They were not tears of sadness, but of a gratitude so deep it couldn't fit in words. The next morning she was wearing the new shoes when she went to prepare breakfast. Francisco saw her enter the kitchen, and his eyes lingered on her feet for a moment before quickly looking away. But Rosa caught the discreet gleam of satisfaction that crossed his face. From that day forward, something subtle but powerful began to grow between them, like a plant that emerges from the earth after a long and awaited rain. Chapter 3. Shadows of the Past. The sound of wagon wheels announced Tomas's arrival long before his robust figure appeared on the dusty horizon. He was the transporter who came monthly to bring provisions and carry news that connected the isolated hacienda to the outside world. A middle-aged man whose graying beard hid an easy smile and astute eyes that saw more than they appeared to. Rosa was hanging clothes on the line when she saw him arrive, and something in her posture tensed like a rope about to snap. She had developed a sharp instinct for dangers, and the presence of strangers always awakened in her body a memory of fear that she preferred to keep dormant. Francisco came out to receive the man, and Rosa could hear their voices mixing with the wind that swayed the wet clothes. But it was when she caught her name being pronounced that her blood froze in her veins like well water in winter. "I'm looking for a woman," Tomas was saying, lowering his voice, but not enough for Rosa not to hear. "Rosa Mercedes Herrera. They say she might be around these parts. There are those who accuse her of theft." The world around Rosa seemed to pause, as if someone had held the breath of life itself. The clothes on the line waved silently, and even the birds seemed to have ceased their song. She gripped the wet fabric in her hands so tightly that her knuckles turned white. "What kind of theft?" Francisco's voice sounded controlled, but Rosa already knew his tones well enough to detect the tension running beneath the surface. "Jewelry, they say, and money. Her employer, a man of means from Guadalajara, is offering a reward for information. Says she disappeared one night, taking everything she could carry." Rosa closed her eyes and saw herself again on that terrible night, when Don Aurelio's hands tried to tear away her dignity along with her clothes, when she fled like a shadow through the dawn, carrying only her intact honor and some clothes on her body. She had never touched anything that wasn't hers, but she knew that a rich man's word would always weigh more than a poor woman's truth. When the voices approached the kitchen, Rosa dried her hands on her apron and prepared to face her destiny. Francisco entered first, followed by Tomas, whose small eyes examined her with the intensity of a hawk that spots its prey. "This is Rosa, our cook," said Francisco, and there was something in his voice that Rosa couldn't immediately identify. Tomas studied her in silence for a moment that seemed eternal. "Rosa Mercedes Herrera?" "Yes," she replied, raising her chin with a dignity that not even fear could steal. "That is my name." The transporter exchanged a significant look with Francisco. "Well, the world is too small for coincidences, isn't it? Perhaps we should talk about certain rewards." It was then that Francisco stepped forward, placing himself between Rosa and Tomas like a human shield. His voice, when he spoke, carried an authority that completely transformed the kitchen's atmosphere. "Rosa has worked for me for weeks, and I can attest to her honesty. If someone has accusations to make, let them make them directly to me. This is my property, and I protect what is mine." The last words resonated in the air like an oath, and Rosa felt something warm expand in her chest. Francisco wasn't just defending her, he was declaring that she belonged to that place, that she had the right to be there. Tomas backed down slightly, weighing his options. Francisco's authority in the region was not something to be challenged lightly, and there were greater gains in maintaining a good relationship with the Hacienda owner than in pursuing uncertain rewards. "Of course, Don Francisco, I was just fulfilling my duty to carry information. But if you vouch for her, I vouch," Francisco cut firmly. When Tomas finally left, carrying his empty wagon and his frustrated speculations, Rosa and Francisco were alone in the kitchen. The silence between them was thick as honey, loaded with unspoken words and mutual recognitions. "Why?" asked Rosa, her voice barely above a whisper. Francisco turned to face her, and for the first time since they had met, he didn't look away. "Because sometimes the truth lives in the eyes, not in words. And your eyes tell me a very different story from the one that man came looking for." Rosa felt tears burn her eyelids, but managed to contain them. She had found something she didn't know she was looking for. Someone who had chosen to believe in her without needing explanations. But they both knew that this wouldn't be the last visit from people looking for Rosa Mercedes Herrera, and that the past has long claws that sometimes reach hearts even in the most distant refuges. Chapter 4. The Garden of New Hopes. In the weeks following Tomas's visit, a subtle but profound transformation began to reshape the days at the Hacienda. Rosa had found, at the bottom of a dusty closet, a bag of old seeds that seemed to have been forgotten by time. They were sunflower seeds, their dark husks promising flowers that would follow the sun in its daily journey across the sky. With Francisco's silent permission, she planted them in the small garden she had begun to clean, creating orderly rows in the dark earth that seemed thirsty for new life. Every morning after preparing breakfast, Rosa watered the flower beds with fresh water, whispering to the seeds as if they were sleeping children who needed lullabies to awaken. Francisco began to make a detour in his morning walks to observe the garden's progress. There was something almost magical in the way Rosa could make the earth respond to her touch, as if she carried in her hands some ancestral knowledge about the mystery of life sprouting, where before there had been only desolation. It was during one of these discreet observations that Rosa caught him spying from behind the bushes, and instead of being embarrassed, she offered him a shy smile that illuminated her face like the first ray of morning sun. "Do you want to see up close?" she asked, cleaning her hands on her skirt and indicating the small green shoots that were beginning to emerge from the earth. Francisco hesitated for a moment, like a wild animal deciding whether it could trust the extended hand, but then approached, his cautious steps on the newly worked earth. "My mother had a garden," he said unexpectedly, crouching beside her to examine the tender shoots. "She said that plants feel when they are loved." It was the first time Francisco had shared something personal, and Rosa treasured those words as if they were precious seeds planted in her heart. They worked side by side in the garden that morning, their hands sometimes touching accidentally when they reached for the same tools, each brief contact sending small waves of awareness through their bodies. During the afternoons, when the sun was gentler, Rosa began to bring her work to the courtyard, where she mended clothes or prepared vegetables sitting in the shade of the great jacaranda. Francisco, in turn, began to take his afternoon coffee nearby, pretending to read correspondence while actually observing her delicate hands, creating small miracles of order and beauty. It was on one of these quiet afternoons that he began to talk about simple things: the color he would like to paint the house shutters, the need to fix the barn roof before the summer rains, plans to expand the north pasture. Rosa listened with genuine attention, asking intelligent questions that revealed an instinctive understanding of rural life that surprised Francisco. "Have you worked on a farm before?" he asked one afternoon, while they shared a picture of a tole in the courtyard. "My father had a piece of land," Rosa replied, her eyes getting lost in the distant mountains. "Small, but ours. He taught me that the land doesn't lie. It gives in measure of the care it receives." There was a sweet melancholy in these words that made Francisco understand that Rosa also carried her losses, her uprootings. This created between them a bridge of mutual understanding, as if they recognized in each other the mark of those who had learned to rebuild their lives on the ruins of what was lost. The storm came on a new moon night, when the sky opened in torrents that transformed the courtyard into a temporary lake. Rosa was running to collect the clothes from the line when she slipped on the wet stones, losing her balance. Francisco appeared like a ghost materialized by the rain, his arms closing around her before she could fall. For a moment that seemed suspended in time, they remained like this, soaked by the rain, his face inclined over hers, their bodies united in a dance that neither had planned. Rosa could feel his warmth through the soaked shirt, could see the drops of water running down his face like transparent tears. "Rosa," he whispered, and there was a whole world of meanings in that single word. But then reality imposed itself again, and he helped her balance, his movements careful as if she were made of crystal. They ran together to take shelter, laughing softly at the rain that had caught them unprepared, and when they separated at the kitchen door, there was something new in the air between them, a mutual awareness that could no longer be ignored. The next morning, Rosa found on her bedside table a small silver brooch in the shape of a sunflower, delicately worked by skilled hands. There was no note, no explanation, but she understood that Francisco had found his own way of saying that he saw and appreciated the beauty she was bringing back to his life. And in the garden, the first sunflower buds were beginning to form, promising flowers that would soon follow the sun in its eternal journey of light and renewal. Teresiuask Chapter 5, The Test of Love. The letter arrived on a September morning, brought by a messenger who had ridden through the dawn to deliver the news. Francisco read it in silence, his face gradually hardening like stone exposed to cold, and Rosa knew instinctively that something had changed in the fragile peace they had built together. "My mother-in-law is coming to visit us," he announced finally, folding the paper with precise movements that hid the tension in his hands. "Doña Remedios de Aguirre, and my brother-in-law Don Patricio as well." Rosa nodded silently, but something in Francisco's tone alerted her to the fact that this visit represented more than simple family courtesy. There was a dark quality in his words, like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. Doña Remedios arrived 3 days later, in a black lacquered carriage that seemed to carry mourning like a flag. She was a woman of majestic bearing, her 58 years carried with the dignity of one whose authority had never been questioned. Her greying hair was pulled into a severe bun, and her mourning clothes proclaimed to the world that she still carried the pain for her lost daughter, like a trophy of maternal devotion. Don Patricio accompanied her, a 32-year-old man whose light eyes surveyed the property with the precision of an appraiser, mentally cataloguing what could be sold and for how much. There was a restlessness about him that spoke of urgent debts and financial necessities poorly disguised. Rosa prepared the main rooms for the guests, changing the bed linens for fine linen and placing fresh flowers in the porcelain vases. But when she presented herself to serve the first meal, she was met by Doña Remedios's icy gaze, who examined her from top to bottom as if evaluating suspicious merchandise. "Francisco," said the lady, with a voice that cut through the air like a sharp blade, "surely you don't expect us to eat at a table served by any employee?" The word employee was pronounced with such disdain that Rosa felt blood rise to her cheeks, but she maintained her erect posture, and serene expression. Francisco, however, couldn't disguise the dangerous gleam that lit in his eyes. "Rosa is our cook," he replied with controlled calm, "and she prepares the best meals I've ever tasted." "Oh, Francisco, dear boy," sighed Doña Remedios, as if speaking to a stubborn child. "You've always been too democratic in your choices. But there are certain social conveniences we must observe." Rosa immediately understood that her presence would not be welcome at the main table during the visitors' stay. Without saying a word, she withdrew to the kitchen, where she could hear the clinking of silverware against porcelain and the murmur of conversations not intended for her ears. But the walls of the old house were thin, and she couldn't help but overhear when Don Patricio began talking about business. "The property is deteriorated, Francisco," he was saying with a naturalness that didn't hide his intentions. "Maintenance costs must be consuming any profit. It would be more sensible to sell and invest in something more lucrative in the city." "This land has belonged to our family for 3 generations, Francisco replied firmly. "Yes, and our family also deserves to live with dignity," intervened Doña Remedios. "Especially considering there are other ways to ensure the continuity of the lineage. Doña Carmen de la Torre became a widow recently, and her dowry would be more than sufficient to restore the family fortune." Rosa felt the air escape from her lungs, as if she had received a blow to the stomach. They were talking about marriage, about a future where Francisco would unite with a woman of his social class, thus ensuring the respectability and wealth that his position demanded. That night, while washing the dishes from the dinner she hadn't participated in, Rosa made a decision that broke her heart into pieces as small as the shards of a plate that breaks on the floor. She would leave the next morning before her presence could cause more embarrassment to Francisco or compromise his future. She packed her few belongings in silence, carefully storing the silver brooch among the folds of her best dress. She wrote a brief letter, thanking for the kindness received, and explaining that she understood her time at the Hacienda had come to an end. She left the letter on the kitchen table, beside a small sunflower seedling she had secretly cultivated, a final offering of beauty for a man who had forgotten how to receive love. The moon was high when Rosa left through the Hacienda gates, carrying her luggage and a heart heavy as stone. She didn't look back, because she knew that if she did, she wouldn't have the strength to continue walking toward an uncertain future. But what she didn't see was Francisco's solitary figure at his bedroom window, watching her departure with an expression of pain so deep it seemed capable of breaking even the silent moon that witnessed that silent separation. Chapter 6. The Return of Lost Love. Rosa had walked for 2 hours when she heard the sound of hooves approaching on the dusty road. Her first reaction was to hide behind a rock formation, fearing it might be Tomas or some other bounty hunter. But when she recognized Francisco's familiar silhouette mounted on his black horse, something in her chest stirred like a caged bird trying to fly. He reached her when the first rays of sun were beginning to gild the distant mountains, dismounting with urgent movements and approaching her with an expression that mixed relief and a pain so deep that Rosa felt the urge to extend her hands to touch it, as if she could heal it through contact. "Why did you leave?" he asked, his voice hoarse as if he had shouted against the wind during the entire ride. Rosa lowered her eyes, unable to bear the intensity of his gaze. "Because I understood that my presence only brings problems for you, sir. Your family is right. There are things that cannot be mixed without causing harm." Francisco took a step forward, and Rosa could feel the warmth emanating from his body, the smell of leather and sweat and something indefinably masculine that always made her feel simultaneously safe and restless. "My family," he said slowly, "doesn't understand that a house without love is just a set of empty walls." He took something from his shirt pocket, a paper folded and yellowed by time. With careful fingers, he unfolded what Rosa recognized as a charcoal drawing, delicate and full of details that spoke of hours of patient work. "My wife drew this shortly before dying," Francisco explained, his voice soft as a prayer. "It's how she imagined our house would be when we had children, with flowers in the gardens, laughter echoing through the corridors, life pulsing in every room." Rosa examined the drawing, seeing the vision of a woman who had dreamed of a home full of joy. There were sunflowers in the drawing's garden, children running through the courtyard, and a general sense of fullness that contrasted painfully with the reality she had found at the Hacienda. "When you arrived," Francisco continued, I began to see that vision becoming reality. You brought the flowers she had dreamed of, the life she had imagined. How can I choose between this and what my mother-in-law calls convenience? The words hit Rosa like gentle but persistent waves, eroding her resistance like water-shaped stone. She raised her eyes to meet his and saw there a vulnerability he rarely allowed anyone to witness. "Your family will never accept me," she murmured, "and I cannot bear to be the cause of divisions between you." "Then let me worry about my family," Francisco replied, extending his hand to her. "The question that matters is, do you want to stay?" Rosa looked at the extended hand, recognizing there an invitation to something much greater than a simple return to the hacienda. It was an invitation to belong, to build something new on the foundations of what both had lost. When she placed her hand in his, feeling the calloused fingers close around hers with a gentleness that belied their strength, Rosa knew she was choosing a path that would be difficult, but true. The return journey was made in silence, Rosa riding behind Francisco, her arms around his waist, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing and the comforting solidity of his body. The sun rose slowly in the sky, painting the world in golden tones that seemed to promise new beginnings. When they arrived at the hacienda, they found Doña Remedios and Don Patricio waiting on the porch, their expressions ranging between relief and poorly disguised irritation. "Francisco, what foolishness was this, running after an employee?" Doña Remedios pronounced the words with an indignation that made her mourning feathers tremble like agitated crow wings. Francisco helped Rosa dismount, his movements deliberately careful and public. Then he turned to face his mother-in-law with a determination that completely transformed his posture. "Rosa is not an employee," he said clearly, his voice carrying an authority that admitted no questioning. "She is the woman I have chosen to share my life." The silence that followed was so dense it seemed to have its own weight, pressing on everyone present like a storm about to explode. And it was in this moment of maximum tension that Rosa understood she had found something worth fighting for, even if the battle would be long and uncertain. Chapter 7. Declarations and Decisions. Francisco's declaration hung in the air like incense in a cathedral, heavy with meaning and impossible to ignore. Doña Remedios paled until her skin took on the color of candle wax, while Don Patricio clenched his fists with a poorly contained fury that made the veins in his neck jump like taut ropes. "Francisco," Doña Remedios's voice trembled with a mixture of shock and wounded authority. "Surely you cannot be serious. What would become of our lineage, of our social position, if you united with a woman?" Francisco completed tranquilly, positioning himself beside Rosa with a naturalness that proclaimed his choice to the entire world. "An honest, hard-working and worthy woman. I believe these are qualities my late wife would approve of." The mention of his dead daughter hit Doña Remedios like a slap, and she recoiled as if she had been physically hurt. Don Patricio, realizing the situation was escaping control, decided to appeal to more practical arguments. "And the money, Francisco, the property's debts. Doña Carmen de la Torre could solve all our financial problems with a simple yes at the altar." "Our problems?" Francisco repeated, and there was a dangerous coldness in his voice. "This property is mine, Patricio. The debts are mine, and the solutions will be mine too." The tension was becoming unbearable when Rosa stepped forward, her voice soft but firm, cutting through the charged atmosphere. "Perhaps I should withdraw while you talk as a family," she said, addressing Francisco with a look that contained all the dignity in the world. "No," Francisco replied immediately. "You stay. They are the visitors." Doña Remedios emitted a sound that was between a sigh and a sob, rising with all the majesty of her offended social position. "Very well, Francisco. I see that this person has exercised an influence over you that I cannot understand. When you recover your senses, you know where to find me." Don Patricio followed her, murmuring something about waste and lost opportunities, and within hours the black carriage left, carrying with it the last attempts by the family to control Francisco's destiny. In the days that followed, a tense peace settled over the hacienda. Francisco and Rosa found themselves navigating unknown waters, knowing they had crossed a line from which there was no return, but still uncertain about what this meant for their futures. It was on an October morning that Rosa made a discovery that would change everything again. When she went out to water her sunflowers, she found the garden completely destroyed. The plants had been uprooted, the flower beds trampled, and in the middle of the devastation, someone had left a note written in coarse handwriting. Flowers don't cover shame. Rosa knelt among the debris of her work, touching with trembling fingers the yellow petals scattered across the earth like golden tears. It was more than the destruction of a garden. It was a direct attack on the symbol of new life she had tried to create there. Francisco found her like this, kneeling among the ruins of her dreams, and the fury that lit in his eyes was so intense that Rosa almost recoiled. Without saying a word, he mounted his horse and left toward the pueblo, determined to discover who had dared violate his property. He returned at sunset with a somber countenance, but brought with him information that changed the situation's dynamic. Father Anselmo had agreed to officialize their union, provided they presented themselves publicly as a couple at Sunday Mass. "It's a way to show we have nothing to hide," Francisco explained, watching Rosa replant the sunflowers with a determination he deeply admired. The following Sunday, when the doors of the small church opened to receive the faithful, Francisco and Rosa appeared walking arm in arm down the central aisle. The murmur that rose from the congregation was like the buzz of irritated bees, but they kept their heads high and their steps firm. During Mass, Rosa felt dozens of gazes upon her, some curious, others hostile, but also some, surprisingly, that seemed approving. Doña Maria, the midwife, offered her a discreet smile, and old Señor Carlos nodded imperceptibly. When they left the church, they were approached by some people. Not all were hostile. There were those who expressed discreet support, simple families who understood that true love was rarer and more valuable than all social conveniences. That afternoon, Francisco and Rosa worked together to fence the new garden with a low wooden fence, creating a protected space where their flowers could grow without fear of destruction. "Now they're safe," said Francisco, hammering the last stake into place. Rosa nodded, but both knew that true protection would come not from physical fences, but from the will to defend what they had chosen to build together. And as the sun set over the hacienda, the first shoots of the new sunflowers were beginning to emerge from the earth, promising flowers that would be even more beautiful for having been planted in soil conquered through courage. Thayakan Chapter 8. The Blossoming of New Dreams. Autumn brought with it a subtle change in the hacienda's routine, as if the season itself conspired to open new chapters in Rosa and Francisco's life. It was during one of their evening walks that Rosa noticed a group of children playing near the property's boundary, their shrill voices cutting through the air like birds in celebration. They were children of workers from neighboring farms, boys and girls of various ages, whose patched clothes spoke of families struggling to survive off the generous but demanding land. Rosa watched them for several days, noticing how they invented games with sticks and stones, how they created entire worlds with the pure imagination that only children possess. It was when she saw one of the girls, no more than 6 years old, trying to draw letters in the sand with a branch that Rosa felt something move deeply in her chest. It was an old desire, buried under years of necessity and survival, but now emerging like water from a long-forgotten spring. "Do you want to learn to write your name?" Rosa asked, approaching the girl with the gentle smile she reserved for life's most precious things. The child's dark eyes lit up like stars being born in the night sky. "Sí, señora. Mama says letters are magical." And so began something none of the region's residents expected. Under the generous shade of the great mesquite that grew in the center of the property, Rosa began teaching the children what she knew about letters and numbers, about the stories hidden in books and the magic of transforming thoughts into written words. Francisco watched her from a distance, fascinated by the transformation that occurred in Rosa when she was with the children. There was a natural authority in her voice, infinite patience in her gestures, and a joy that illuminated her face in a way he had rarely witnessed. "Have you been a teacher before?" he asked one afternoon, finding her organizing pieces of slate she had bought in the pueblo for her improvised classes. Rosa smiled with sweet nostalgia. "It was my dream when I was a girl, before life taught me that dreams are luxuries that people like me cannot afford to have." "And now?" Francisco sat beside her, watching how her delicate hands arranged the materials with the care of one preparing a sacred ceremony. "Now I feel that perhaps dreams just fell asleep, waiting for the right moment to awaken. The words floated between them like petals carried by the wind, loaded with meanings both understood without need for explanation. Francisco took one of the slates in his hands, running his fingers over its smooth surface. "The Pueblo's school closed 2 years ago when the teacher left for the capital," he said thoughtfully. "The children have been without formal education since then." Rosa raised her eyes to him, and Francisco saw there a hope so intense it almost blinded him. "Do you think that—" "I think a teacher is exactly what this community needs," he replied, covering her hand with his. "And I think you are exactly the teacher they deserve." In the following days, news spread through the Pueblo like fire in straw. There was resistance, of course. Some families questioned whether an outsider woman would have the authority to teach their children. But there was also a desperate need that overcame prejudices. Parents who recognized that their children deserved better chances than they themselves had had. Rosa began her classes formally on a Monday in November, with 12 children sitting in a semicircle under the mesquite. She had brought from home a collection of books she had kept as treasures over the years, and Francisco had built an improvised blackboard where she could write lessons with white chalk on dark wood. "The first thing you must know," she said on that first day, her clear voice cutting through the morning air, "is that each of you carries within yourselves stories that deserve to be told, and letters are the tools that help us tell these stories." The children watched her with such intense attention that Rosa felt a shiver of responsibility run down her spine. She was before young and hungry minds, thirsty for the knowledge she could offer. When the first class ended, and the children ran home carrying their slates like trophies, Rosa remained alone under the mesquite, looking at the leaves dancing above her head with a sense of completeness she hadn't experienced in a long time. Francisco found her like this, lost in contemplation, and when she turned to him there were tears of gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, and he understood she wasn't just thanking him for allowing her to teach. She was thanking him for helping her dreams awaken from their long sleep. And while the wind swayed the mesquite leaves, creating a soft music that seemed to bless that moment, both knew they had found one more reason to believe that the future they were building together would be more beautiful than anything the past had offered. Chapter 9. The recognition of Worth winter arrived earlier that year, bringing with it cold mornings that made breath form small clouds of vapor and golden afternoons that seemed to bless the earth with special light. Rosa had established a routine that gave structure to her days. She would wake before dawn to prepare meals, dedicate mornings to her classes under the mesquite, and spend afternoons caring for the house and the garden that now flourished protected by the fence Francisco had built. The improvised school had grown. It now had 18 regular children, and some who appeared sporadically when family tasks allowed. Rosa had organized teaching by age groups, creating lessons that challenged older children, while still managing to hold the attention of the younger ones. It was during one of these classes that Father Anselmo appeared unexpectedly, walking along the path that led to the hacienda, with his brown cassock fluttering in the wind. The children stood respectfully when they saw him approach, but Rosa felt a chill in her stomach, fearing he had come to end her teaching activities. "Good morning, children," said the priest with his gentle voice, observing the slates covered with letters and numbers. "May I watch a class?" Rosa nodded nervously, indicating a log where he could sit. For the next hour, Father Anselmo observed in silence, while Rosa taught about the seasons of the year, using dry leaves to illustrate how nature transforms cyclically, always promising renewal after periods of dormancy. When the class ended and the children ran home, the priest remained seated, his thoughtful eyes fixed on Rosa. "Where did you learn to teach like this?" he asked finally. "By observing," Rosa replied honestly, "and remembering how I would have liked to be taught when I was a child." Father Anselmo nodded slowly. 2 weeks ago I received a letter from the bishop questioning about rumors of an unauthorized school functioning in my parish. I was prepared to come here and order you to cease your activities." Rosa's heart raced, but she maintained a serene expression. "And now?" "Now I see that God works in mysterious ways," the priest smiled. "These children are learning more in a few weeks with you than they learned in years without formal education. I'm going to write to the bishop recommending that your school be officially recognized." The joy Rosa felt was so intense she had to hold on to the mesquite trunk to avoid losing her balance. Francisco, who had observed the conversation from a distance, approached with an expression of pride that made her heart race even more. "There's another matter," continued Father Anselmo, now addressing both of them. "The pueblo is talking a lot about you two. Some comments are less than charitable. I believe it would be beneficial for everyone if you made your union official." Francisco and Rosa exchanged a look loaded with mutual understanding. They had talked about marriage on silent nights, when they conversed softly in the courtyard under the stars, but always as something distant, almost abstract. "When?" Francisco asked simply. "Next Sunday would be appropriate," replied the priest. "A simple ceremony, but official. Enough to silence malicious tongues and bless what clearly already exists between you." That night, while Rosa prepared dinner, her hands trembled slightly with the proximity of what was to come. It wasn't nervousness exactly, but an acute awareness that her life was about to transform irreversibly. Francisco found her in the kitchen, watching her work with the concentration that always characterized her. Without saying a word, he positioned himself behind her, his hands covering hers over the dough she was kneading. "Are you sure?" he murmured in her ear, his warm breath sending small shivers across Rosa's skin. She turned in his arms, looking directly into his eyes. "I'm sure I want to build a life by your side. The rest, we'll discover together." Francisco inclined his head and kissed her then, for the first time since they had met. It was a soft kiss, almost reverent, as if he were sealing a promise that words couldn't completely express. When they separated, Rosa rested her forehead against his, and both remained like this for a long moment, breathing the same air, sharing the same space, already united in all the ways that mattered before any official ceremony happened. "Sunday," whispered Francisco. "Sunday," agreed Rosa, and the word sounded like a prayer of gratitude for the mysterious paths that had led two lonely hearts to find each other in the vastness of a world not always kind to dreamers. And while the moon slowly rose over the hacienda, illuminating the garden where sunflowers slept, awaiting the next sunrise to follow again their eternal journey of light, Rosa and Francisco began planning not just a ceremony, but an entire life of shared mornings under the same roof. Chapter 10. The sacred Union Sunday arrived wrapped in a golden mist that made the morning seem woven with dream threads. Rosa woke before dawn, as always, but there was something different in the quality of silence surrounding the hacienda. It was an expectant silence, loaded with possibilities that hung in the air like promises whispered by the wind. She had spent the previous days sewing a new dress, using light blue fabric that Francisco had secretly brought from the pueblo. It wasn't silk or damask, but the fine cotton had a soft quality that kissed her skin like a caress, and the color reminded her of sky on spring days, when clouds are just white suggestions against the infinite blue. Francisco had shaved carefully and dressed in his best suit, a dark ensemble that had belonged to his father. He was waiting for Rosa in the courtyard when she emerged from her room, and the expression that crossed his face when he saw her was so intense that she felt her cheeks blush, like rose petals touched by morning sun. "You're beautiful," he said simply. But there was so much love in those two words that Rosa felt her heart expand until it almost didn't fit in her chest anymore. They walked together to the pueblo on a morning that seemed to have been created especially for them. Birds sang with more melody, flowers seemed more vibrant, and even the air carried a different fragrance, as if nature itself wanted to bless that day. The small church of San Miguel was fuller than usual. News of the wedding had spread, and there were curious people mixed with regular faithful, all eager to witness the union that had caused so many whispered comments in recent months. When Rosa and Francisco walked down the church's central aisle, the congregation's murmur was audible, but this time there was more admiration than criticism. Rosa had won many hearts through her school, and even those who initially opposed her presence were beginning to recognize the value she brought to the community. Father Anselmo awaited them at the altar with a genuine smile, his experienced hands holding the prayer book as if it contained all the secrets of human happiness. "We are gathered here," he began with his voice that carried decades of experience in uniting lives, "to bless the union of Francisco Esteban Montemayor and Rosa Mercedes Herrera, two souls who found in each other the complement they sought." Rosa looked at Francisco during the priest's words, Seeing in that face she had learned to love every line of worry, every shadow of past pain, every glimpse of future hope. When the moment for vows came, he took her hands in his and spoke with a voice that, though low, carried a conviction that reached the most distant pews. "Rosa, you brought light to a house that had forgotten how to shine. I promise to honor that light every day of my life, protect it from all storms, and help it grow until it illuminates not just our house, but the entire community you have already transformed so much." When it was Rosa's turn, her words came from the heart, with a simplicity that touched every person present. "Francisco, you taught me that belonging is not a concession, but a right of those who truly love. I promise to make our house a home worthy of your dreams and mine, a place where love is the only law that governs." When Father Anselmo declared them husband and wife, and Francisco kissed Rosa before the entire congregation, there was a moment of absolute silence, as if time had paused to witness that union. Then, spontaneously, applause began to echo through the church, first timid, then warmer, until the entire church was celebrating with them. Doña Maria, the midwife, was the first to approach to congratulate them, her calloused hands squeezing Rosa's with a warmth that spoke of genuine approval. "May God bless this union," she said, and there were tears of joy in her eyes. Others followed, humble families whose children Rosa taught, merchants who had learned to respect her, even some who had initially been hostile but now recognized the quality of her character. When they finally left the church, walking under a rain of flower petals that Rosa's children threw in their direction, Francisco and Rosa felt as if they were walking not just toward their house, but toward a future both had helped create through the courage to believe in true love. That afternoon, while receiving congratulatory visits at their house, Rosa observed Francisco talking with neighbors, saw how he spoke of her with evident pride, how he introduced his wife with a dignity that silenced any remaining criticism. And when night fell and they were finally alone in their house, now officially their house, Rosa understood she had found something rarer than gold. She had found the place in the world where her heart could finally rest and flourish. Chapter 11. The Promise of New Life. The months following the wedding flowed like pages of a book where each chapter brought a new discovery about the art of building a shared life. Rosa and Francisco developed an intimacy made of small rituals. Coffee taken together on the veranda while the sun rose, quiet conversations about property plans, the way their bodies found each other during sleep, fitting together like pieces of a puzzle that was finally complete. The school had become a respected institution in the region. Children now came from distant farms, some walking for hours to attend Rosa's classes. She had organized teaching at different levels, and Francisco had built a small shed near the mesquite so classes could continue even during summer rains. It was on a March morning, when the first heat promised the arrival of a new season, that Rosa made a discovery that would change their lives forever. For several days she had felt a persistent morning nausea, accompanied by increased sensitivity to certain smells. Doña Maria discreetly called for a consultation, confirmed with a maternal smile what Rosa already suspected in her heart. "You're expecting a child, my dear," said the midwife, watching Rosa's face illuminate with a joy so pure it seemed to radiate its own light. Rosa carried the news in her chest all day, savoring the secret like a special sweet, saved for the perfect moment. When Francisco returned from his tasks on the property, he found her in the garden, tending the flowers with a lightness in her movements that seemed new. "There's something different about you today," he said, approaching from behind and wrapping her in his arms. Rosa turned in his arms, her eyes shining with contained emotion. "Francisco," she began, her voice soft as rose petals, "remember when we talked about how it would be if our house were filled with young voices?" Something in her expression made Francisco's heart race. "Rosa? We're going to have a child," she whispered, watching as understanding spread across his face like dawn spreads across the sky. Francisco lifted her from the ground, spinning her in a circle while laughing with a joy that echoed throughout the entire property. When he set her back down, there were tears in his eyes, but they were tears of a happiness so deep it completely transformed his features. "A child," he repeated, as if the words were a prayer. "Our child." In the following months, Rosa flourished like a plant that finally finds the perfect soil for its roots. Her belly grew round and proud, and Francisco developed a protective tenderness that surrounded her like an invisible cloak. He insisted on carrying any weight, helping her with the simplest tasks. And at night he would talk to the unborn child, whispering stories about the farm that would be its inheritance. The school continued functioning, although Rosa had to adapt her activities as the pregnancy advanced. The children proved incredibly protective of their teacher, competing among themselves to see who could help her most, who would bring the most comfortable chair, who would carry the heaviest books. It was during one of these classes, when Rosa was in her 8th month of pregnancy, that they received an unexpected visit. An elegant carriage stopped in front of the property, and from it descended a woman Rosa recognized only from descriptions, Doña Carmen de la Torre, the rich widow that Doña Remedios had tried to arrange for Francisco. Doña Carmen was a 40-year-old woman, still beautiful, dressed with discreet elegance that spoke of real wealth without ostentation. She observed the improvised school with intelligent eyes, noticing the organization, the children's dedication, the evident respect they had for Rosa. "So this is the famous teacher everyone talks about," she said, when Francisco appeared to receive her, her voice carrying more curiosity than hostility. Francisco immediately assumed a protective posture beside Rosa, but Doña Carmen raised a hand in a gesture of peace. "I didn't come to cause problems," she said. "I came because I was curious to meet the woman who conquered not only your heart, but the respect of the entire region." During the hour she spent on the property, Doña Carmen observed everything with the attention of someone accustomed to quickly evaluating situations. She saw the evident love between Rosa and Francisco, the modest but real prosperity of the farm, the genuine joy of the children who studied there. When she prepared to leave, she addressed Rosa with surprising frankness. "My dear, when I learned that Francisco had chosen a common woman instead of an advantageous alliance, I thought he was foolish. Now I see he was wiser than any of us. You've built something here that's worth more than any dowry." And with this unexpected declaration of approval, Doña Carmen left, leaving behind confirmation that Rosa had conquered a place in society not through birth or wealth, but through the strength of her character and the quality of her actions. That night, while Francisco gently caressed her belly where their child grew, Rosa reflected on how life had a mysterious way of rewarding those who have the courage to follow their heart, even when the path seems impossible. Chapter 12. The Birth of Hope. The autumn of 1884 arrived with restless winds that made the mesquite leaves dance like anxious hands, and Rosa, now in her 9th month of pregnancy, felt a growing restlessness that echoed the season's mood. Her body had transformed into a precious vessel, carrying the world's most valuable treasure, and each movement was calculated with the care of one who carries liquid crystal. Francisco had become simultaneously more attentive and more nervous, checking on Rosa constantly, insisting she rest more, worrying about every slightly different sigh she emitted. Doña Maria had installed herself in a house room a week earlier, preparing for childbirth, with the serene efficiency of someone who had already helped countless lives arrive in the world. It was on a new moon night, when shadows seemed denser and winds whispered ancient secrets through the house corridors, that Rosa felt the first contractions. They began as gentle waves, almost imperceptible, but gradually intensified until they became a powerful force that took over her entire being. Francisco remained by her side throughout the night, holding her hand, murmuring words of encouragement, being her anchor when waves of pain threatened to carry her away. Doña Maria commanded the process with maternal authority, her experienced hands guiding the unfolding miracle. "I can already see the head," announced the midwife when the first rays of sun began to filter through the windows. "One more time, Rosa. Your daughter is almost here." Daughter. The word echoed through pain and effort, filling Rosa with renewed strength. With one last great effort that seemed to gather all the universe's energy, she brought her child into the world. Esperanza's first cry, for that was the name Rosa whispered the moment she saw her, cut through the morning air like celestial music. Francisco cried openly when Doña Maria placed the girl in his arms, a perfect little creature with dark hair like his and almond-shaped eyes like Rosa's. "Esperanza," he repeated, testing the name on his tongue. "Our hope." The days that followed passed in a golden haze of discoveries. Rosa learned her daughter's rhythms, when she cried from hunger, when she needed to be rocked, when she simply wanted to feel the warmth of maternal arms. Francisco revealed himself to be a dedicated father, walking the corridors in the early morning hours, when Esperanza was restless, singing lullabies he had learned from his own mother. The school had to be temporarily suspended, but the children appeared regularly to see the baby, bringing wildflowers and small gifts made with their own hands. Rosa, watching how they bent over the cradle with almost religious reverence, felt her heart expand with gratitude so deep she could barely breathe. It was when Esperanza was 3 weeks old that news arrived that shook the Hacienda's peace. Tomás appeared again, but this time he brought different information. Don Aurelio, the man who had accused Rosa of theft, had been arrested for attempted assault against other employees. Several women had come forward to testify against him, and the accusations against Rosa had been withdrawn. "It seems the truth finally came to light," said Tomás with a genuine smile. "You were always right about her, sir." Francisco nodded, but there was no surprise in his eyes. He had always known Rosa was incapable of the dishonesty she had been accused of. The news only officially confirmed what his heart already knew with certainty. That night, while Esperanza slept peacefully in her cradle, and the full moon bathed the hacienda with its silver light, Rosa and Francisco sat in the courtyard to talk about the future. "Now there's nothing threatening us anymore," said Francisco, holding Rosa's hand in his. "We can really start living without looking over our shoulders." Rosa nodded, but her eyes were fixed on the stars that dotted the sky like diamond promises. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had never come here," she murmured. "Don't think about that," Francisco replied firmly. "You were destined to arrive here, just as I was destined to wait for you. Some things are written in the stars long before we're born." And while the night wind carried the perfume of sunflowers growing in the protected garden, Rosa felt complete peace settle in her heart. There had been storms in her past, but now she lived in the lasting calm of those who had found their true place in the world. The family she and Francisco had created was small but perfect, built on foundations of true love and mutual respect. And when she looked at the cradle where her daughter slept, Rosa knew she had achieved something that had once seemed impossible. She had transformed dreams into reality through the simple courage to believe she deserved to be happy. Epilogue: The Eternal Harvest of Love. The summer of 1891 brought with it a gentle but constant prosperity to Hacienda San Francisco de los Olivos. Esperanza, now 7 years old, had inherited her mother's sharp intelligence and her father's quiet determination, running through the house corridors like a ray of sunshine made child. Her dark hair flew behind her like a flag of the joy that had permanently settled in that home. The school had grown to include more than 30 children, and Rosa had obtained official recognition from the provincial government as an educational institution. The original shed had been expanded 3 times, and now included a small library, with books donated by regional families who recognized the value of the education Rosa offered. Francisco had diversified the farm's activities, introducing agricultural techniques he had learned through correspondence with specialists from the capital. The property wasn't rich in the traditional sense, but there was a quiet abundance that spoke of honest work and careful planning. It was on an August afternoon, when heat made the air wave over the golden fields, that a familiar carriage appeared on the horizon. Rosa immediately recognized the black vehicle that had once carried away Francisco's mother-in-law, and her heart tightened with instinctive apprehension. Doña Remedios descended from the carriage with slower movements than last time. The 8 years had taken their toll in the form of whiter hair and a slightly curved posture. But her eyes maintained the same intensity, and there was something in her expression that Rosa couldn't immediately decipher. Don Patricio didn't accompany her this time. Rosa learned later, through fragmented conversations, that he had lost his fortune in poorly calculated investments and now lived off distant family favors. His past arrogance transformed into humility, forced by circumstances. "Francisco," said Doña Remedios when he came out to receive her, her voice carrying less authority than memory of authority. "I came to make peace." The words hung in the air like dust raised by wind, and Rosa, watching from the veranda while Esperanza played at her feet, felt a complex mixture of emotions. Part of her still harbored the pain of initial rejection, but there was also a mature understanding about grief and resistance to change that had motivated her mother-in-law's hostility. During the days that followed, a strange dynamic was established in the house. Doña Remedios observed everything with eyes that seemed to be re-evaluating long-formed judgments. She saw how Esperanza ran to Rosa's arms when she got hurt, how Francisco and Rosa worked together in the kitchen with a harmony that spoke of years of collaboration, how the house vibrated with an energy she had forgotten existed. It was when she saw Rosa teaching children under the mesquite that something definitively changed in Doña Remedios's expression. There was a natural authority in Rosa that commanded respect without demanding it, a patience that transformed each lesson into a small pedagogical work of art. "She's an exceptional teacher," commented Doña Remedios with Francisco that afternoon, watching how Rosa helped a particularly shy child read their first words. "Yes," Francisco replied simply, but there was pride in his voice that couldn't be hidden. "And Esperanza is a brilliant girl." "Yes, she is." Doña Remedios remained silent for a long moment, watching her granddaughter play with other children in the courtyard. "I was wrong, Francisco," she said finally, her words coming with difficulty, as if each one were a weight she had carried for years. "I was so trapped in my grief that I couldn't see you had found exactly what my daughter would have wished for you." Francisco turned to face her, and Rosa, who had quietly approached to listen to the conversation, saw tears in his eyes. "Rosa didn't replace Elena," continued Doña Remedios. "She built something new and beautiful on the foundations Elena had dreamed of, and Esperanza is the continuation of our family, in a way I hadn't imagined possible." That night during dinner, Doña Remedios addressed Rosa directly for the first time since her arrival. "Rosa," she said, her voice formal but not hostile, "I would like to ask your forgiveness. I allowed my pain to blind me to your qualities, and that was unfair both to you and to Francisco." Rosa felt tears burn her eyes, but managed to respond with a firm voice. "There's nothing to forgive, Doña Remedios. The love you felt for your daughter is understandable and honorable. Still," insisted the older woman, "I hope we can start over." And so Rosa conquered not just respect, but genuine acceptance from Francisco's family. Doña Remedios remained at the Hacienda for 2 more weeks, and when she left, she embraced Rosa with an emotion that spoke of recognition and final approval. "Take good care of him," she whispered in Rosa's ear, "and let him take care of you." Rosa nodded, understanding she had gained not just a mother-in-law, but an ally in her determination to make the Hacienda a place where love was the principal law governing all decisions. And when the carriage disappeared on the horizon, taking with it the last vestiges of resistance to the future Rosa and Francisco had built together, the Hacienda breathed with complete freedom for the first time in years. December 1891 brought with it a special softness to the Hacienda's air, as if nature itself wanted to bless the end of a year that had definitively consolidated the Montemayor family's happiness. Rosa was sitting under the mesquite, watching Esperanza play with other children after the afternoon class, when Francisco approached carrying a letter that had arrived with the morning mail. "News from the capital," he said, sitting beside her in the generous shade of the tree that had witnessed so many important moments in their lives. "The provincial education director wants you to consider supervising other rural schools in the region." Rosa took the letter, carefully reading the formal words that officially recognized the success of her pedagogical work. It was a significant honor, a validation of years of dedication that had transformed illiterate children into young people capable of reading, writing, and dreaming of futures that had previously seemed impossible. "What do you think?" asked Francisco, observing the expressions that succeeded each other on his wife's face. Rosa folded the letter carefully, her eyes surveying the garden where golden sunflowers swayed gently in the evening breeze. "I think our work here is just beginning," she finally replied. "But perhaps it's time to share what we've learned with other communities." Esperanza ran to them at that moment, her cheeks pink from exercise, and her eyes shining with childhood's inexhaustible energy. "Mama, can you tell me again how you met Papa?" It was a story Esperanza never tired of hearing, and Rosa smiled, pulling her daughter onto her lap with the fluid movement of one who had performed this gesture thousands of times. "Well," she began, using the special tone she reserved for the most precious stories, "once upon a time there was a woman who arrived at a very sad farm where flowers had forgotten how to grow and happiness had hidden behind closed curtains." Francisco listened to the familiar narrative with a smile, watching how Rosa transformed their own story into a fairy tale where love triumphed over all adversities. There was magic in the way she told it, an ability to make even the most painful parts sound like necessary chapters in a journey toward light. "And then Papa taught Mama that she could stay?" asked Esperanza, at the appropriate moment in the story, fulfilling her role in the family tradition. "Not exactly," Rosa corrected gently, as she always did. "Papa taught me that I already belonged here, that my heart knew the way home long before my mind understood." "And did you live happily ever after?" "We are living happily now," Francisco interjected, extending his hand to touch Rosa's face with a tenderness that hadn't diminished a single degree in the 8 years since they had met. "Each day is a new chapter in our happiness story." That night, after Esperanza fell asleep in her room, decorated with drawings she had made herself of sunflowers and horses, Rosa and Francisco sat in the courtyard, under a starry sky that seemed to have been polished especially for them. "Sometimes it still seems like a dream to me," murmured Rosa, her head resting on Francisco's shoulder, while they watched the silent dance of stars. "Which part?" he asked, kissing the top of her head. "All of it. The fact that a woman like me could find a home on a property like this with a man like you. The fact that our sunflowers grew and our dreams became reality." Francisco remained silent for a moment, considering her words. "You know what I think?" he said finally. "I think it wasn't us who found this place. I think this place found us when we both needed healing, when we were both ready to believe again that happiness was possible." Rosa raised her eyes to meet his, seeing in those dark depths all the love that had grown between them like plants grow toward light, naturally, inevitably transforming everything around them. "Nos fuimos queriendo despacio," she whispered, using the words she had said to Esperanza earlier, "like learning a song without knowing the lyrics." "And now we know the entire melody," Francisco completed, sealing the words with a kiss that tasted of fulfilled promises and futures yet to be discovered. While the moon slowly rose over Hacienda San Francisco de los Olivos, illuminating the garden where future generations of sunflowers would still grow, Rosa Mercedes Herrera de Montemayor understood she had achieved something rarer than all the world's treasures. She had found the place where her heart could flourish forever, surrounded by the love of a family she had chosen to build with the patience of those who know that life's best things grow slowly, but last forever. And in the years that would follow, when the school expanded to serve the entire region, when Esperanza grew to become a teacher like her mother, when other young couples came seeking advice on how to build happy marriages, the story of Rosa and Francisco would be told as proof that true love has the power to transform not just 2 lives but an entire community, 1 generation at a time.